Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Neil Haley Show. And I'm really excited to welcome the host of When Women Fly, Sylvia Winter. Sylvia, thanks for stopping by. How are you?
Oh, Neil, thanks. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. See, when I met you and you first told me you fly, I'm like, and you told me about the podcast, but then you said fly. I started thinking about it. Wow. I remember when I always talk to people that fly or do something so extraordinary, it like puts people like standoffish or like, wow, isn't it like it amazing when you tell people you fly?
Yeah, it's a great conversation starter for sure. No one wants to talk about anything else once I tell them I'm a pilot.
Yeah, because it's like, I can't believe you're a pilot, really. And so how did that story start? And then we'll talk about the podcast. But I'm just so intrigued. I know one pilot in my life, and I was working with him, and he was a fighter pilot, and also he flew for Southwest. And I just every time
Yeah.
we would co-host and interview people, they would always say, "Oh my gosh, celebrities, amazing people like were like
Yeah.
that wow factor." So that's
Yeah,
kind
it's really cool.
of
Yeah, so I didn't grow up in a aviation family. A lot of people have parents or dads that flew, which I didn't. It's just I always wanted to learn how to fly, and it wasn't my professional pursuit. I'm a landscape architecture by training. So I went into the arts and science and sort of a STEM field, but it wasn't actually until I had my second child that I realized that if I didn't start doing this thing that I always wanted to do, that I probably wouldn't do it and wouldn't have a chance to try it. So um, I started flying at almost 30, and yeah, I just got the bug. I mean, it was everything that I thought it would be. It was challenging, and it really forced me to show up as a pilot in command, which was exhilarating. But it's also just so darn cool. It's just amazing. It's amazing to fly over the land, which is ultimately my love is land, and being able to see it from that perspective is really incredible.
how do you get a pilot's license? How's that work?
Ah, so you find a flight school, and they're all over the place. There are different types of flight schools, but you can like literally Google flight school, and there's probably a small airport near you, and there's probably a flight school there. And you ask them for a discovery flight, and they'll take you up, and they'll give you the controls for a little bit, and you can see how it feels, and you go from there.
What skills do you need to have to be able to do this? Because there's not lots of commercial pilots, right? I mean, commercial or even that have a pilot license is not a huge percentage of people in the world, is
Yeah,
it?
it's not a huge percentage of people. And I would say it's one of those things that if one wants to do it, they can do it. I mean, the training is challenging. There's certainly some math in there, and there's a lot of intuition to be able to fly well, and you have to acquire knowledge. Um, but it's reachable for, I would say, any human being. I mean, we'll talk about the podcast, but one of my recent guests is a woman that was born without arms, and she's a pilot. So
Yeah.
anyone can learn how to fly. It might be more or less challenging depending on whatever your strengths and weaknesses are. There are a lot of components that go into flying, from reading a map and navigating to following some rules and making good judgment calls and understanding how to trade power for altitude and things like that. But it's all learnable.
So there has to be some sort. You must have had no fear when you at all. No.
Oh, no,
Yes.
no, no, no,
Really?
no, no. Fear was part of it. Fear still is part of it. I mean, I go to the airfield trying to talk myself down from all the reasons I shouldn't fly. But it's kind of cool doing things that you're afraid of, right? Then you realize like you can do things that you're afraid of. And yeah, no, I fear was definitely part of it. I mean, less so now than when I was early on, because I know the procedures and I know I've trained for emergencies. But yeah, fear's there.
It sounds, I mean, I would be, I mean, I'm not afraid of flying, but always the takeoff and when you go fly somewhere is scary. I mean, because you just feel that it's not scary, but it's just like a real rush. So I couldn't imagine with a plane to get in on to go ahead and take off and
Yeah.
the feeling.
Oh, yeah. leaving the earth is a pretty incredible experience. It's kind of addictive too.
So I guess what you're saying, a lot of the point of entry of people not doing it is fear, I bet you. Because again, when you crash a car, the chances compared to an airplane a little different, right? Especially. And so if you do crash like a car, you might survive, but the chances of survival of a plane crash is completely different, right?
Yeah, it's a bad day to have a plane crash for sure. But if you really do look at the numbers, driving is actually pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
And there are very clear ways that you can reduce your risk while flying. Being current, being well trained, practicing a lot, following the rules. So yes, it is less forgiving falling from the sky, but there are a lot of ways to mitigate that risk. And I would say even more than driving when you're, at the whims of the other people that you're driving with.
True. There's no one you have certain people that could be in the air, but that's the job of the air traffic controller to make sure that you don't end up hitting some other plane. It's more
Yeah.
about keeping the controls, navigating where you need to go. It's, in a way, flying is a lot like a ship in the old days, right? Especially navigating through those certain things. You have certain control, but you really don't have certain control flying, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you have to hold both sort of the precision and being very calculated with also the sense of being nimble and being very sort of in tune with the changing factors, the variables, because it's a very dynamic situation, right? So yeah, that is the same in that way, similar.
All right, so let's kind of talk about why the podcast. And I love the title, When Women Fly, because again, we can think about it's just going to be about women flying, but really it's about women who are taking, and let's hear you give us that explanation.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. So, When Women Fly is a podcast that celebrates the spirit of flight. And I use flight as a metaphor. And we talk about it literally and metaphorically when I speak with my guests. So, I have women, it's an interview format. I have women every week come and tell their journey through the obstacles, the challenges that they needed to overcome. We talk a lot about dismantling fear, not necessarily overcoming it, but almost like sort of sitting with it and living with it. And essentially like how these women navigate a world that is often male dominated, that is following a way that's following their passion, following their intuition, and sort of reaching beyond expectations or perceived limitations. So I do interview pilots, but often my guests are pilots and other things, or maybe not even pilots at all, might be ski jumpers or trapeze artists or runners. I try to really listen when I'm doing my research for my guests to hear for people that talk about, oh, I was flying, or
Right.
I'll hear runners be like, I was flying, or trapeze artists, or skiers. So whenever I hear that, I'm like, okay, this is a potential person that knows that feeling of leaving the sort of the leaving gravity in one way or another. And again, metaphorically or figuratively. So it's really about that spirit of flight, because I feel like it wasn't intended to be a podcast about women who fly, which would be a different podcast, very compelling, I'm sure. But it was really about sort of the phenomenon that happens when women are able to overcome those perceived limitations.
And that's the problem. A lot of times we have preconceived notions of what women can do and not do it. It starts in school. Okay, women are better at reading in English, and boys are better, and girls and boys, boys and men are better at math and science. So it already starts that process where we talk about as babies, okay, you're playing with dolls while you're going to play with trucks. And that's just not a good way of really allowing people to find themselves, especially knowing that, guess what, you can do anything you want. I talked to Michelle Snow for Podcast Magazine interview, and she basically set the boundaries so high for herself Okay, she grew up in a poor family. I'm going to get 17 scholarships. She ended up with 150 athletic and academic scholarships. She was the first woman to dunk in a college basketball game. That is that is what we talk about of your guests, to do something just so amazing that, wow, no one would think that. And at the time, I know that in sports, we never thought that women were going to dunk a basketball, right? We never knew that women could be better than men in certain things. And the obstacles are being broken and breaking right through that glass ceiling. And that's such an important thing. And I think that's what your podcast is trying to do.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, it certainly is targeted for women who are overcoming perceived limitations, but right, all humans do, right? And I think the more we can break down in general the gendered activities and the sort of the conditions that create limitations on all humans, I think we're all going to be better off, because if we can all sort of be all that we can be for our own version of that, then we're bound to be better off, rather than feeling like we're pigeonholed or we're boxed in some way.
It's a great exercise. I think that we miss out, and this would be a great thing for anyone to listen to, because sometimes they just have that bias that they don't think it can happen. And we need to be able to tell little girls, you can do whatever you want. We're not going to give you limitations. And I think that's what this show's doing.
Absolutely. And that there's a support network out there. So if you don't get that positive feedback in your immediate environment, come to us. We're here. And there's a lot of positive mentorship and just support for young girls and older women. I mean, women that are in their middle age have never often really spoken from their own heart, or, lived a life that was their own. And I think that's also a really amazing time to start unlocking that level of authenticity and sort of free spirit.
You have that goal of creating a community, so this becomes a movement, right?
Yeah.
What you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's my hope.
And it's going to happen. So you put it in your mind, it's going to happen.
It is happening.
Right,
it is happening. I mean,
it's happening
I know
with the podcast already, because you're transforming stories that are just not told all the time. And I think that's fantastic. Where can people check out the podcast? Where can they go?
So on all your favorite podcast platforms, we push the podcast out on Thursday mornings, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We also have a website, whenwomenfly.com. And you can also send out an email to hello@whenwomenfly.com.
The movement continues to grow, and that's a tremendous thing. And I think that we have to understand in so many ways that we should never limit anyone from doing anything that they want to do. And I think that diversity is such an important part of the conversation, but also to understand that we can never tell people they can't. It's they can. And if we can tell everyone you can, and not give them that roadblock, wow, the things that can happen are just tremendous. So I appreciate you coming by.
Thanks so much, Neil. I appreciate it.
All right. You're listening and watching The Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.